Hey there, sociologists. It is lesson 10 of Community. Wicked. So our learning goals for today are you're going to know what changes during social change, and you're going to be able to generate ideas. That's our activity for today. So the effects of social changes. So when we say social changes, what do we mean? I'm talking about changes in, for example, beliefs. So for example, belief in religion is dropping. Change of values. So discrimination against people based on their race or gender or sexual orientation has been reducing over the last few decades. It's still too high, but it's certainly a lot lower than it's ever been. Changing traditions. For example, respect for your elders is not as common as it used to be. Changing language. Words like flex and throwing shade were not terms when I was your age. Change in social institutions. So marriage is less common. Divorce is more frequent. It didn't even used to be legal. And now people of the same gender can get married as well. And changing relationships. So, for example, in the workplace, it's a bit more equal between bosses and their underlings. There's a bit more work, and a lot more work environments are a bit flatter in terms of the hierarchy, rather than like your boss is like God. So why are there changes in society? Good question. They could be on purpose. So, for example, social movements. That's an entire unit. That's the next giant topic that we look at, area of study 2. Like Black Lives Matter is a social movement that's actively trying to change society by making it less racist. And there can be unintended effects on society from other social changes. So, for example, the change to allow same-sex marriage, I would argue, has reduced discrimination based on sexual orientation. Economic changes. So, for example, 100 years ago, it was quite common for just the man in a relationship to go out and work, and the woman would stay home and look after the children, be a housewife. Due to economic changes, the cost of living going up, and people wanting more material wealth, you're more likely to see both parents in a typical nuclear family going out to work than you used to. And political changes. So, for example, women getting the right to vote. That has increased gender equality quite a lot, I would say. Here's an interesting little slide that defines social change: an enduring historical force with noticeable variations. Change could be hardly discernible, hardly noticeable, or really easily observable. It could be constructive or destructive, but whatever its nature, it happens everywhere and every time. Change has been regarded in many ways as a means, a process, an ends, or even a social movement, a state of affairs involving a project, an ideology, and a problem. The use of new objects or ideas to reach certain goals. Yeah, so I guess the point there is that social change is a very broad topic. It can be defined almost any way you like. Here are actions that create social change. Now, forget the arrows for a second. This is not a cycle. These are all just various things, actions that create social change. Organising the community, protests, philanthropy, that's giving money to charity, voting, socially responsible behaviour, and even research. Yippee! The good news is there's very few notes to write down today. So there's a little mini case study here. Murals in Ireland. So in, I think it's Shannon, there was a thing called the Big Wash Up, where they painted a lot of the walls of public buildings, really dirty old walls. They cleaned them up, painted them. Stories. Anyway, so public murals allowed for civic dialogue. So what I mean by civic dialogue is, you know, discussion between people and the sharing of ideas through art. In this example, these murals in Ireland, they honoured the shared memories of the old people who came up with the ideas, and then the young people painted them, and they created new ones. Yeah, new ones of making the murals. And there were big benefits. There are benefits to communities participating in shaping public spaces. So allowing the community itself to help shape public space rather than just letting the government do it or private businesses do it has a huge benefit for those communities. So here someone's made a little free WordPress site documenting the big wash-up. So the one in the textbook is Shandon, which is in Cork, I think that's what it's like. Anyway, this is from about 10 years ago. So here we go. Here's some people who are doing the reverse graffiti, which is where you clean up a little area of a wall and then you put some stencil art on it. So that's them doing it there. Yada yada yada. Here's some of the cool art that they did. So it was a real big intergenerational thing. It was old people telling them stories and young people who were doing the artwork. So there was a big connection between different groups in the community. And there it is forever. Yay! So I also wanted to show you this guy Adnate, Matt, last. He's the older brother of my girlfriend's best friend, so I've met the guy quite a few times. He's really awesome. He's from Melbourne. He's painted all over the world now though, and his stock and trade is he'll take a photo on his iPhone of an Indigenous person and then spray paint them on the side of a massive building. So there he is there. Here's some of the stuff that he's done in Fitzroy. You've probably seen quite a bit of his art if you've walked around Fitzroy. He's got some stuff on the side of Brunswick Street. He's also done some stuff on those silos in regional Victoria. And it's his big thing is Indigenous people and, you know, a group that you could say are arguably not that visible. He's trying to paint them in huge murals so that they are more visible. So, and you know, this has become something that people come from all around to have a look at. So it creates a real sense of community. And this, you know, and he's from Melbourne, so this is an example of community-led participation to improve the public space. Cool. Interesting but random picture with a whole heap of little pictures of communities helping to co-create their own spaces there. So just have a look at that. You know, I mean, like, you probably know about community gardens. You've got, like, yeah, public spaces make a really big deal. You know, like removing traffic from an area and letting people walk around it is really great for the community. Woohoo! Our activity for today, I want you to copy and complete this table. I want you to come up with 5 ways a community can enhance its own social cohesion, and then just a little dot point about how it does it. So you could use some of the examples that you've seen already, or you can come up with your own. How can communities enhance their social cohesion? How can communities make them more cohesive, more have a feeling of togetherness? Good luck. We've got an awesome video from Crash Course Sociology. This is called How We Got Here. So this is a bit more of a historical social change. Yeah, this unit's more about social changes over the last 100 years or so, but this is like social change like from day 0 of history. But it's really interesting, so check it out.
Until about 12,000 years ago, the largest group of people ever assembled, the most humans ever gathered in one place, was probably a crowd of about 100, tops. And there were somewhere between 1 and 10 million people on the entire planet back then. Today, we have football stadiums that can fit 100 people 1,000 times over. The city of Shanghai has a population of over 24 million, and there are almost 7.5 billion people on Earth. How the heck did we get from there to here? That might sound like a history question, and it is, partly. But it's also a sociology question. Because if we want to understand how we got from small groups huddled around a fire to cities of millions, we need to understand what society is and how societies change as their populations grow. And we need to understand how different kinds of societies shape the people who live in them. Pretty much any question you can ask about society, you can answer with the help of sociology. As long as there have been humans, there have been societies. We're social animals, and even when there were mere handfuls of us, we grouped together, forming the first societies. Now, society can mean lots of different things. A few families who spend all their time hunting deer and picking mushrooms can be a society, but so are the 70 million people of the Roman Empire, and so are the 1.2 billion people living in India today. So we need a definition that's going to include all of these things, and conveniently enough, we have one. A society is simply a group of people who share a culture and a territory. That's a good definition, but it doesn't really tell us much about the different kinds of societies, or how we get from one kind to another. For that, we turn to the work of American sociologist Gerhard Lenski. Lenski focused on technology as the main source of societal change, through a process he called sociocultural evolution, the changes that occur as a society gains new technology. Lenski then broke up human history into 5 different types of societies, defined by the technology they used and the social organizations that the technology helped create and sustain. If you look back to early human history, say about 30 to 40,000 years ago, you find a lot of what Lenski called hunting and gathering societies. In these societies, people made use of extremely basic tools to help them hunt animals and gather wild plants for food. Now, if you think about how much you eat in a day and imagine trying to gather up that much food every day, it should be pretty clear that this is no easy task. So food was the major concern in these societies, and they still exist today. People in hunting and gathering societies spend almost all their time trying to make sure they have enough food, and they're nomadic, following migrating animals and wild harvests, so they don't build permanent settlements. So by their very nature, these societies tend to be small. Hunting and gathering can't support a group of more than 25 to 40 people effectively. And in order for hunting and gathering to support even that, everyone has to work to find food, and everyone has to share their resources in order to ensure the survival of the group. This means that these societies have very low inequality. For the vast majority of human history, every single person lived in hunting and gathering societies, up until about 12,000 years ago, when the domestication of plants and animals led to new kinds of society: horticultural and pastoral societies. Pastoral societies are based around the domestication of animals and are also nomadic, moving from place to place to keep their herds fed. Horticultural societies, on the other hand, are based on cultivating plants. So with horticultural societies, we see the first human settlements as groups began to stay put to remain close to reliable sources of food. And we also see for the first time the accumulation of material surplus, that is, more resources than are needed to feed the population. This is incredibly important because having a surplus allows a society to grow. And it also means that not everyone needs to work on getting food and simply surviving. This, in turn, leads to the first real instances of specialization in society, with separate political, religious, and military roles coming about. We also get real social inequality for the first time. And this same dynamic accelerates as we move into agrarian society, as permanent settlements emerge based around agricultural production. Starting about 5,000 years ago, with better farming techniques like the animal-drawn plow, we get more food production and an even bigger material surplus. From this came larger populations and larger settlements, with even more specialization and even more inequality. Remember serfs and nobles? Feudalism was an agrarian society. And you know what else happens when societies reach this point? The family starts to become less important. In other kinds of societies, things like education are handled almost entirely by the family. But as societies grow and become more complex, those functions start to be taken up by larger social institutions like the church or schools. And now we finally start approaching present-day America with industrial societies. These societies get their start with the Industrial Revolution around 1750, as production began to shift from human and animal power to machine power. This had a massive impact on food production, with new technologies like the tractor and the combine producing huge surpluses that could support even larger populations with even more specialization. But the Industrial Revolution also marked a fundamental change in the organization of society itself. Societies far larger than anything seen before meant a greater need to assert centralized control over everything, from the production of goods to transportation to agricultural production, in order to keep things running smoothly. For the first time, human society moved away from a subsistence-based economy. As mass production became possible, a capital-based economy emerged. As the surplus grew and specialization increased, so did inequality, with factory workers spending 12-hour days on one end and incredibly wealthy captains of industry making enormous profits on the other. It's no coincidence that soon after the Industrial Revolution, Marxism and conflict theory emerged. And the decreasing importance of the family continued as well, as more institutions stepped into traditional family roles. Industrial societies were the first to have universal public education, for instance, and for the first time, the majority of healthcare and caregiving were were institutionalized, done outside the home in hospitals. The need to keep production organized also meant an increasingly urbanized population, because it's easier to control the resources you need if they're centralized. So people moved from the countryside to urban centers where the industrial jobs were. And all of this keeps going in Lenski's scheme of things, with specialization and technological innovation continuing until the development of the computer, a technology that gave rise to the post-industrial society. In post-industrial societies, we still see specialization, increased urbanization, and technological advances. But the defining change is that post-industrial societies shift away from an economy based on raw materials and manufacturing to an economy based on information, services, and technology. This is how we got here. If you look at the most dynamic sectors of the US economy, you see massive wealth being created in tech, finance, and service industries, but a steady decline in manufacturing. That said, it's not as though Americans don't buy stuff. Apps can do a lot of things, but they can't yet conjure a car out of the ether for you. So this is a good chance to point out that these different types of society aren't isolated from each other. You can't have a post-industrial society without having industrial societies elsewhere to supply it with goods. This points again to increasing inequality, not just within one society, but across societies. So in Lenski's understanding, societal change is driven by technological change. But it's worth pointing out that not all of these changes are beneficial. Pollution, global warming, and large-scale warfare are new problems that technology has brought us. And technology doesn't solve fundamental societal problems. It has the potential to reorganize society, but technology can't tell us how to have peaceful or just societies. In fact, just looking at Lenski's classifications, you can see that advancing technology also advances inequality in society, making it increasingly unequal. So we can't limit our discussion of society to just looking at technology. But that's okay, because the sociocultural changes that Lenski talks about can also be understood using the work of some old friends, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Marx, for example, might seem pretty similar to Lenski at first. If you think back to his theory of historical materialism, he certainly seems to put a strong focus on technology and the economy as the driving forces of history. Remember, he saw that changes in the forces of production are important in pushing the change from one mode of production to another. But for Marx, you only get large-scale social change through class struggle, which culminates in a revolution, overthrowing the old relations of production and replacing them with an entirely new set. So in Marx's view, the transition between Lenski's stages requires technological change, but it also requires revolution. And we can also use Marx's understanding of conflict to compare Lenski's stages with each other. In hunting and gathering societies, for example, conflict and inequality are leveled by the lack of surplus and the need to share resources, but that's not the case in post-industrial society. Max Weber, for his part, seems further away from Lenski than Marx, focusing not on technology or revolution, but on ideas. The major transition that Weber talked about was the shift from traditional to modern society, which he argued was really a matter of rationalization. Now, it's not that Weber didn't appreciate the importance of technology, but he argued that the transition from agrarian to industrial society, for instance, began with a shift in ideas, like new techniques in accounting and ways of approaching social organization. And it was these ideas, combined with advances in technology, that produced the overall change. So in this view, both ideas and technology were crucial for the emergence of modern capitalism. And Durkheim finally took a different tack from either Marx or Weber. He approached the transitions that Lenski talked about from the perspective of a society's underlying social structure. Specifically, Durkheim saw the history of society as a long-term change in solidarity, a change in what held societies together. He argued that hunting and gathering societies were held together by similarity, what he called mechanical solidarity. Durkheim argued that everyone in these societies had the same skills and lived in basically the same way. But that changed as society developed and specialization increased. With more specialization, people became more differentiated, taking on different jobs, learning different skills, and living in different ways. But Durkheim argued people also became more tightly integrated because they became more interdependent. Factory workers needed farmers to make food so that they could eat, and farmers needed factory workers to make their tools and other goods. Durkheim called this interdependence organic solidarity. And so Lenski's sociocultural evolution is, for Durkheim, the story of a long transition from mechanical to organic solidarity. Ultimately, all of these ways of looking at society and its changes from the point of view of technology, or conflict and revolution, or ideas, or underlying social structure are important for understanding what society is and how it works. Each one of these perspectives sees things that the others miss, and each one is important for the discipline of sociology. Today we learned about the society, what it is, and how it changes. We talked about Gerhard Lenski's classification of societies into 5 types, and the technological changes that turn one into another. We returned to Marx and Weber and talked about how they understood societal change. And we also talked about Durkheim's understanding of society and how social solidarity can be mechanical or organic. Crash Course Sociology is filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio in Missoula, Montana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice people. Our animation team is Thought Cafe, and Crash Course is made with Adobe Creative Cloud. If you'd like to keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can support the series at Patreon, a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the content you love. Thank you to all of our patrons for making Crash Course possible with their continued support.
This is a TED Talk. I hope you like TED Talks because they are cool. This is a guy, and his title of his speech is Social Change Needs Engaged Communities. So you're talking about the fact that engaged communities are really beneficial for social change rather than just relying on heroes like Gandhi or something. They are good, but engaged communities make a big difference. So check this one.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to the organizers. I just want to begin my talk with a little story. When first I came to the States, I was in a barbecue here on campus. That was like 2.5 years ago. And one of my American friends approached me and asked me, so which kind of superheroes do you guys have in El Salvador? I was like, we don't really have superheroes down there. And then I started digging up a little bit more in that answer. And then I realized that in my country, since the very beginning, in the family and in schools, we are taught that if we want to see change, if we want to foster change, we have to get together with other people, build relationship, and act as a family, act as a community. That's why we don't really feel the need of superheroes. Having said this, my talk is about that, social change, community, and superheroes. And when I was crafting this talk, I started doing a little brainstorming of the ideas that came to my mind when I heard social change. And the first thing that came to my mind were names of people that have done great contributions to societies around the world, like Martin Luther King, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Rosa Parks, or Cesar Chavez. And the problem with these iconic figures in history is that they are portrayed as icons, almost as godness. And we kind of relate them to superheroes. So we can see that superheroes are not only in comics. Superheroes are also in the way how we learn history. And that's very dangerous because we don't really feel connected to these like big social leaders. And we feel that we don't have their power to foster change in our society. For example, I'm not feeling really capable right now of gathering 250,000 people and bring them to Washington in order to foster some very landmark act. I don't feel like I have Martin Luther King's power. I feel disconnected, but it's because I have learned that Martin Luther King was a very special person, like a hero, and I feel like I'm more normal. However, I'd rather conceive these social heroes as community organizers, and I'd rather dig up a little bit more into history, and I realized by myself that these people were not alone. They really built power among the community. They were not doing these things by themselves. They reach out to churches, they reach out to other communities, and that's why they were capable of fostering these big landmark transformations in their own societies. And there is a huge difference among heroes, superheroes, and community power. And as you may recall, superheroes usually act alone by themselves. They climb buildings, they can fly, they don't need anyone. While community empowerment is all about reaching out to people, making connections, doing relationships. Also, superheroes are most of the time hidden. They have a hidden identity. They use masks. They don't want to be noticed. While community organizers, they need to become public. They need to showcase their plans, whatever they're capable to do so. They need to be there in the public scene. Additionally, superheroes build dependence. Citizens are dependent on superheroes. What will Metropolis do without Superman? Nothing. They are fully dependent on Superman. But community organizers, they try to build power in the community. They try to empower regular people. And they help them realize that they are capable of fostering change if they act together as a community. And finally, the most important difference is that superheroes do not transform society. They only fight evil in the surface level. That's why we have so many movies of Batman, like Batman 1, 2, 3. I think next year is going to be Batman 15. Because there are evils coming and coming and coming. Batman hasn't been able to really transform society in such a way that wouldn't allow more evil people to come to the city. Having said this, I need to clarify the concept of social change. For me, social change is intrinsically related to social justice. And social justice is the way how society delivers wealth, opportunity, and power among society members. So any sort of social change has to do with that, has to do with transforming the society in a more equal and fair environment. And I want to put an example on this. For example, food stamps. Food stamps are very good, but they are not really fostering social change because food stamps are not really transforming the economic structure that is excluding people from the capability of going to the supermarket and buying the food by themselves or growing their food. Food stamps are just in a surface level. They are not changing that economic system that excludes people. I'm not saying that food stamps are bad, but are not social change. Can be a public welfare program or could be charity or goodwill, but they are not social change. Social change has to do with social justice. I want to give you 3 concrete takeaways beyond this theoretical concept of social change. And these 3 takeaways, I didn't read them in a book. I didn't learn them watching movies, but I experienced them by myself in social movements. The first one is this picture. That's a gigantic human chain of 1,000 people covering almost a mile. And what they are doing is that they are bringing together 2 monuments. One monument is representing monument to the justice, and the other one is representing dignity. This took place in El Salvador, in a country that poverty rate is over 35%. So when I was back there, I was working for a nonprofit, and we decided to take a step farther. We decided to affect the decision-making structure that was excluding people to poverty. So we invited the communities that we were working with all over around the country. There were around 25 communities. And we asked them to come to the capital and to voice their needs, which means that although the general topic was there is no dignity without justice, communities were allowed to claim and advocate for their own issues. For example, some communities were advocating for land rights, or clean water rights, or violence, or lack of safety in their communities. So the takeaway of this successful public demonstration in this social movement is that communities and the participants really owned the activity. So ownership will be a very key element in social movement. The next picture is back in El Salvador. That's my town. I was born there. And El Salvador also is very well known because it's high crime rates. So nobody there goes out at night by themselves. And we and some other friends decided to challenge that perception. And we decided to go out for a run at night. It was a short run, like 4 miles. When we went back, like an hour later, we felt something good. We felt like we had fun. But besides that, we felt excitement because we were challenging very well-known and spread perception, the perception of unsafety. And because it was good and we enjoyed it, we decided to replicate the same run the next week, but with more friends. We decided to invite more friends. So the next week, we were not just 4, we were 13. And the next week, we were around 35, and so on and so on. After 2 months, we were 200 people, 200 citizens running every single week at night in El Salvador, one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Now, I came to the States, and some other friends took over the leadership of the initiative, and 3 years later, they are not 200, they are 500 runners, and they do not only run once per week, they do it twice per week. So we really transformed the city by just doing some sport at night. And now the city is not alone at night. You have hundreds of people there, and they are taking care of each other. You have thousands of eyes there that are witness of anything that may happen there. It's a safer city now. The takeaway of this experience is that I didn't show you how the movement looks like now. Yeah, that's like around 500 people right there. And the takeaway of this movement is you have to do something cool, something that the people really like, but at the same time, something challenging. We were challenging the perception that nobody goes out at night in El Salvador. And for young people, that's very attractive. And the last experience that I want to talk about is in Campaign for Change. That's my job. I'm the full-time organizer for this grassroots initiative in the next city to Bethlehem, which is Allentown. And as you may know, the American public education system doesn't work in the same way for all. Especially doesn't work well for African Americans and Latinos. And in Allentown, there is a huge concentration of Latinos and African Americans. So we decided to do an assessment of the school board and to try to make them realize that they are accountable to the people who pay taxes and who vote them into power. So we used a very well-known tool that teachers use to grade the students, the report card. Everybody who goes through the American public education system receives periodically report cards in order to inform their parents how their children are doing in schools. So we asked the community to design a report card for the school board. So the community designed this huge report card in English and in Spanish, and we failed them in some categories. And we publicly delivered this report card to the administration building. And it was great. We had a lot of media coverage. We had the Morning Call, Channel 69, the Express Times covering that activity. And it was a great and easy approach of how to empower the community, how to make them realize that they have the power of hold these public officials more accountable, using the same tools that they are already used to. And that's the takeaway of this experience. Use the tools that are already available in your own community. In this case, the tool was a report card. Everybody knows, and everybody knew in that time, what was the report card for. And I need to put these 3 takeaways in a broader perspective. Right now, in the world, we are still facing hunger, we are still facing wars, we're still facing crime. However, we have the technology, knowledge, and resources to solve it. But nobody is doing nothing meaningful regarding solving these issues. And it's because frontline communities and people who are really experiencing these issues in the world, they don't have the political power to use the resources and technology to solve those issues. But now, I'm giving you these 3 specific takeaways, these 3 specific steps for you to use them and start your own social movement. And my last message to you will be, you are not superheroes. You are real. You are real people capable of transforming your own society. Thank you.
Right, reflection activity. You can do a SWOT analysis. So with the topic of social change, give me one strength, one weakness, one opportunity, and one threat. The reason why we're doing this regularly is because SWOT analysis is developing your skill at evaluation. It's making you look for strengths and weaknesses in any proposition. So with the idea of social change, you can decide whether that's beliefs, values, traditions, language, social institutions, or relationships. Give me a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, and a threat. Fun? Homework? Yes! Sick. Right, read those 3 pages and do a practice response. If you're in my class, you're going to do that on OneNote. And here's the practice response topic. So this is an extended response. So spend as much time as you want preparing and planning for it, but I want to see how much you can write in 15 minutes. There's no point writing it for an hour. That's unrealistic. You're never going to do that. Analyze the extent to which increased connectivity via technology creates greater social participation and community participation. Social interaction, yeah. So the command verb there, the task word is analyze, yeah? So it's about analyzing the extent. Analyze means to pull apart all of the things and see how together they make up the whole. So the extent is how much do you think the increase in technology has created greater social interaction and community participation. So your conclusion has got to say how much you think it has increased the amount of social interaction and community participation, yeah? And you need to analyze it. So what are the various factors in the use of technology that might increase social interaction and community participation, yeah? So you need, before you start writing about this, an analysis is pulling it apart, right? So you need to pull apart the increase in technology and then explain how those parts together create greater social interaction and community participation. I know that analysis is a lot harder than the stuff we've been doing so far, where it's just been discuss, explain, outline. These are the kinds of questions that you need to be able to answer. Thank you so much for taking part in this lesson, and do not ever forget to keep it real.